Okay, today's shir is sponsored in honor of the yahrzeit of Leah Rachel Bas David Yitzchak. The yahrzeit is tomorrow. Shama Shev and Aliyah. Okay, last week we talked about the Persian Kohanim, and we all see how that went. So I'm gonna lay off that topic, move on to something else. I'm going to talk about duchening, which is related to kahuna, and I think we're going to open up a series now a little bit on some of the interesting duchening things. Now, there's a famous yeshiva shemachlekes about Shemei Ka'ina. I'm sure a good amount of people heard it about between the Beis Halevi and the Chazon Ish about Shemei Ka'ina by duchening, and I really want to get to that machlekes, but I want to start a little bit further back and tie it all together here. So what's interesting is that in the year, it's Baruch 1710, let's call it, in Ferrara, Italy, which is a city in northern Italy, a yeshiva town, a town that had a yeshiva, a town that had Talmidei Chachamim, on Erev Yom Kippur, Nachtatzu, no less than Erev Yom Kippur, a petition, I guess you would call it a petition for injunctive relief, today is what we would call it, a petition to the court for immediate injunctive relief was submitted to the local magistrate by two brothers, Kohanim, who lived in Ferrara. Their claim was that they were being prevented from duchening in the shul unjustly. They claimed that they deserved to be duchening in the shul just like anybody else, and they were being unjustly prevented by a system that was against them. And they submitted a claim to the non-Jewish authorities, to the government, to the court, for the court to force the shul to allow them to duchen on Yom Kippur. We don't know what the response of the court was, if they were successful in this petition or not. But this alone, that they petitioned the court for this thing, is pretty outstanding. So what is their fight about? What were they petitioning? What's going on? So in this letter that they wrote, it's a Hebrew translation. I don't know if they wrote it in Hebrew or they didn't write it in Hebrew. They write to the local judge a little bit of an overview about duchening. Jews duchen, we say these psukim, it's a mitzvah, how we do it exactly, and then they bring a little bit about the machlekes. So let me tell you what their fight was, how it got to court, and how it gets to the Beis Halevi. So it seems as follows. There was a minig in Italy. The way we duchen today, if you go to any shul, the way we duchen today, you'll have 10, 15 Kohanim will get up on the in front of the aron, and they'll duchen. They'll usually sing a little together. There's different tunes. Different kehilas have different tunes that they use. Different kehilas have different tunes that they use for different times. Many kehilas would like to believe that their tune is all the way from the Beis Hamikdash. That's in Chabad they said that at some point. It's not clear if they still say that. The Riyatz has two different girsas. Maybe others say similar things. Other Chassidim, people would like to believe that their particular tune for duchening comes from the Beis Hamikdash. But duchening has a tune. Duchening has a particular unit cohesion. How the Kohanim are supposed to get up and duchen. Now that duchening that it has a tune is not stam haphazard. It's supposed to be very specific. And Ad Kedei Kach, I just want to read you a few samplings from the Poskim. Most of this makes it to Shulchan Aruch Afilu, to the real Poskim, but I'll read you a few samplings from the Shulchan Aruch before we get to the actual particular Italian fight. The Mikar Chaim, the Chavos Yair in Aruch Chaim, he writes something. It's almost comedy, but he writes as follows. He says the din is the Gemara in Saita says that the pasuk tells us duchening is supposed to be b'kol ram in a loud voice. The Gemara in Saita tells us it should be b'kol beinani, like a middle voice, not too loud, not too low. Now he brings as follows. He says, "B'kol ram." I want to read you what the Chavos Yair writes. It's funny. He says, "Mikol makim toiv v'yafe shelo litzek tza'akas gedolos umaris zehena v'zehena." It's better if the Kohanim don't scream loudly, one like this and one like that, all screaming loudly. Lo yarizeh k'harizeh. Lo yatzad hashav behem kenog. No tzad hashav between them. Mizeh nirish and esfashad haminig b'ktas mekaymes. Says it seems the minig is that we shalayanichu goy bebeis hakneses beis haduchen. You don't allow non-Jews to be in the beis hakneses during duchening time. Why? If the guy walks in and he sees a bunch of Jews standing with their hands under their towels in the front of the shul, that looks weird enough, he says. But it's even worse, the screams and the shouts that are chutz miged anushi, the inhumane screams that the Kohanim are doing when they're doing their duchening. The proper way to do it would be with a calm and pleasant voice. It says it's not mistaver that back in the day they used to duchen with these weird sounds that everyone's duchening with today. It says they switched rum to mar, the reish mem, they switched the order, and it went from loud to disgusting. Said the Paiskim didn't have the ability to stop them, so they just allowed everyone to do what they wanted. So clearly, Al Kabanim, we see the Chavos Yair didn't think that these Neschayos were from the Beis HaMikdash. That Al Kabanim is clear from the Chavos Yair. But the Chavos Yair is being very critical of Kohanim who don't have a good cohesive way of singing the songs associated with duchening together. Now, this gets mamash codified into halacha, because the Trumas Hadeshin, in a famous Shaila, the Trumas Hadeshin has as follows. It says, Shaila, Kohanim hamenagnim, Birchas Kohanim k'sha'ilum l'duchen, shari luhu l'nagin shnayim ashel shenagonim kigoin b'chol pasik b'chol teva nigin achar eloi. The Trumas Hadeshin wants to know, is it permitted for the Kohanim to use 2, 3, 4 different tunes for different psukim, for different segments of duchening, like we do for the Chadaydi or whatever, or do the Kohanim have to all do the same tune, meaning one tune for all the capitals of duchening? Now the Trumas Hadeshin goes off on a little drush, and he says, Yireh, delay kashal and hachi. It's not good to treat duchening like the Chadaydi and make changes in the tune. First, he brings the famous Gemara. The Gemara in Kedushin, the Fayin Aleph says that mitchila, the Kohanim would say the Shem shall Membe Zaisius by duchening. They would say the Shem Hashem of Membe Zaisius. But eventually, most Kohanim didn't know it anymore, and they would only pass it on to the Tznuim. And the Tznuim, those who knew it, I say, they would swallow it up in the Imas Echav HaKohanim, within the singing of his brothers, the Kohanim. So you see clearly that duchening had some sort of particular tune that allowed for Kohanim who knew the Shem Hashem to be mavliya, to squeeze it in, to slip it in, when the other Kohanim wouldn't be saying it, and no one would be the wiser. Now, the Trumas Hadeshin brings, he says, singing is an integral part, the nusach, the tune, is an integral part of the duchening. And as he says, it's very important not to allow multiplicity of changes in the nusach of the singing, because it's going to lead to Tir of Hadas. Okay? What do you say?
Shabbos.
What do you mean Shabbos? Shabbos, yeah. But in Eretz Yisrael, when they duchen every day, I don't think they sing either, right? Yeah. No, but it's important to have cohesion, basically. The nusach has to be set and committed in a very particular way, so that Kohanim could do it. Everybody knows what they're expecting. Everybody knows what they're hearing. Part of the beauty of duchening is supposed to be the ne'imus. And there's many different, less halachic sources that are focused on the ne'imus and the singing, but these are some that even aren't halacha. And this one, that the Trumas Hadeshin paskins, is gebracht in Shulchan Aruch, and Simon Kuf Chav Ches and Sif Chav Aleph. Shulchan Aruch says, Eina Kohanim Rishoy L'nagim B'Berchas Kohanim Beizi Gimel Negunim, Shum Dekel L'Mechesh L'Tir of Hadas, Ve'en L'nagim Al L'Niged Echad Mitchil Vad Seif. Since there's a chash for Tir of Hadas, the Kohanim should not make alterations to the tune and sing 2, 3 different tunes. They should only sing the same tune for the entire duchening. This is what it says. And rather, it's kedai to know this, the Taz over there, Afanar, brings, he says from here is Musar for the Chazanim who sing a lot of different tunes by different words in davening and Yom Tov also. So the Taz Stam takes this gelegenheit in Hilchas Nesias Kapayim to give Musar to Chazanim who sing too much on Yom Tov. Stam. The Yerabba, of course, jumps in and saves the Chazanim. The Yerabba says there's a chilik to be had between Chazanim and duchening. He explains the chilik and etc. But the fight continues. But and the Rosh Hashanah paskins like this, and this gebracht in the Rosh Hashanah and the Mishabura. So this becomes like codified halacha that the tune has to be specific. The tune is supposed to be something organized and structured. Now it seems, let's wind back the clock again to the early 1700s in Italy. This is what happened over there. It seems in Italy they originally had the minhag like us, where everybody would gather on the Amud, they would duchen, everybody would sing. It would be maybe beautiful, maybe like the Makar Chaim, either rum or mar, but it was what it was. They sang a tune. Nobody knows exactly why this change happened in the minhag, but the minhag became that one kohen would have the honor of leading the duchening. He would say it out loud properly, and all the rest of the kohanim would say it in a soft voice together with him. Now maybe this was because they wanted it to be beautiful. They didn't want it to be a gelechter. It happens to be that if you look, Italian shuls b'chlal were very self-conscious of churches. Italians lived in very Christian surroundings. They all lived in a very, very Christian area. They're built similar to churches, a lot of them, with the placement of the Amid, the Aron, the Beam. They're very self-conscious. They're built beautiful to match up to the local churches. Sometimes the style of the building looks like a church. Italian shuls are very self-conscious. It's yitachin that they were self-conscious of how duchening appeared, how the singing appeared in the shul. And to rectify that, they made this minhag where one kohen, probably someone who had a good voice or someone who practiced before or was well-trained, would do the duchening, and everybody else would sing along softly together with the kohen. This became the minhag. Now, what happens is as follows. If everyone's singing together, it's very hard to hear exactly what emphasis of the word I'm saying. Meaning, there are the ending words, Yishmerecha, Vichuneka, and Shalom, are words that can be pronounced in Hilchas Diktok, either Milra or Mil'el. You could put the emphasis on the word in the beginning of the word or the end of the word. But Kolkam, everybody's singing together in a group, it's very hard to discern how anybody's pronouncing the words. It's begeder mavliyos ibn imasecha v'kohanim. It's getting absorbed in the crowd singing. Now, what happened is that once people started, an individual chazan started saying it, you were much clearer. You were able to hear much more clearly how he was enunciating the words, where he was putting the emphasis on the word, and they developed a particular way of enunciating these words. Meaning, everyone seems, most of the Ilam, would enunciate the words. In Ferrara, the city that we're talking about, Ferrara, northern Italy, they would enunciate the words in a particular way. The tune would schlep the word all the way to the end, and the emphasis would be on the end of the word. Now, there was these two particular Kohanim in town, Reb Nechemia and his brother, whose name we don't know, who were daikanim. They were very particular about diktuk and how things are supposed to be spoken out. And they did a little research. They sent letters to various different other towns and Kohanim, and they came to the conclusion that the emphasis on the words need to be in the beginning of the word. So therefore, they schooled themselves. They practiced their tune appropriately to make sure that they were going to be able to structure the word properly the way they think it needs to be done. They get invited with the great honor of duchening for the tzibur and everybody else doing quietly. And Rechemi and his brother duchen, and they pronounce the words differently than everybody else. A little stir in the shul, this is something different. These Kohanim are pronouncing the words differently. It's an emphasis question. It's not, they're not saying anything different or singing anything. It's just an emphasis question. They do this. The Olam tumbles a little bit, and the local Rabbanim, even some of them pretty big people, look, they say it's fine. This is not a big deal. They let it go. But as always, there are some people who were not willing to let it go, and this became a big tumult. Now these Kohanim, Reb Nechemia and his brother, wrote to a Rav, Reb Emanuel Riki, not Reb Emanuel Chai Riki, that's someone else, someone maybe a little more familiar. Reb Emanuel Riki was a Talmud Chacham Rav. They wrote to Reb Emanuel Riki, and he wrote them back a tshuva, a long tshuva, it's like a 30-page tshuva, saying that their correction is the appropriate correction, and an old minig that's Seiser Halachan, that's connected the rules of Diktuk, is no good, we should get rid of it, and you are correct, you guys should do what you're doing, you, Reb Nechemia and your brother should do what you're doing. Now, that far from putting it to rest, that emboldened Reb Nechemia and his brother, and they decided to copy-paste Reb Emanuel's tshuva and send it to several more Rabbanim. Because in his tshuva, he told them that he spoke with several other Italian Rabbanim, and they were all masking to him. Seeing this, sensing the opportunity, they decided to send this letter out, to a few more Rabbanim, and they collected a few signatures in support of their position that they have to change the duchening. Now, their Misnagdim, whose names we don't really know, decided also to double down, and they wrote to various Rabbanim, and a small collection of tshuvas on either side developed. Now, I always say this, there are certain svarim that have like a journalistic eye. They have like an eye for like great questions, great controversial things to fight with. One of the best at this, at choosing controversial topics to write about and get people's collected opinions on was Rabbi Yitzchak Lamportny. He later on goes on to publish Pachad Yitzchak, which is the first Jewish encyclopedia. In it, there's collections of people's tshuvas on various fights and topics. But he was Rosh Shiva in Ferrara. That's where he was based out of. And when this shaila arose in the early 1700s, he put out a kuntris published by his yeshiva called Meitzitzu Meilitz, I think it's called. Yeah, Meitzitzu Meilitz, and then Tesefes Meitzitzu Meilitz, and Tesefes Bikuri Katzer. And Bikuri Katzer was volume after volume after volume. He put out a kuntris, and he had a great journalistic eye, and he collected one position this way, supporting positions, dissenting positions, back and forth, and except that this was actually a practical shaila and a practical shul. Meaning, in an academic sense, it was beautiful, it was flowering, it was beautiful, everyone got to contribute, it was amazing. But this was actually negayat shul, and the people of Ferrara, the Rashi Kol, the Rashi of the shul, the Kehila, were not okay with Rav Nechemia and his brother, violating their orders and making shinuyim, to the point where they kicked them out of shul. And Rav Nechemia and his brother went to daven by the Ashkenazim, le'aleinu. Because the Ashkenazim, in the Chuvas you'll see over here, chas v'shalom, to say that they were right, Ashkenazim were karav yoser to the right way that it should be. It wasn't perfect, it was karav yoser to the way it should be. So they went to daven by the Ashkenazim. Eventually, the minhag changes again, they get invited back, forth, and this is a whole sefer of the back and forth of all the chuvas, from all the different sides and all the interventions from different rabbanim and etc. It's Rav Pinchas Chai Anu, Rav Shimshon Amor Purgo, Rav Shapsi Del Vecchio, Rav Yitzchak Important. These names, I don't know how much they mean to people today, but these are Greiser Rabbanim in the north of Italy in the time. These are also very consequential Talmidei Chachamim, and the fighting that's going on over there is primarily hinging on Hilchas Diktuk, like Milra and Mil'el, which I'll spare you. A second akuda that it's hinging on is the ability of Minhagim to be Eikar Halacha, meaning presuming that Reb Nechemia and his brother are correct in how it should be, but Afal Pikin, the minig is not like that, so what happens when the minig is Seisei Halacha? That's an interesting part that gets re-quoted sometimes later on, but again, limited, because this wasn't published in its full way till recently. And the third part of it is hinging on the Trumas Hadeshen and the Levush and the Ramah, about Ne'imas HaKohanim, what exactly the tunes and the particular of the tunes of the Kohanim should be. Now, it's a fight. It goes on and on. I don't even know what the resolution is, where exactly Nechemia and his brother ended up duchening, how it changes. But Hanigel in Yinenu is that this minig takes another change. It morphs even further. And instead of being a minig that one kohen duchens out loud and the other kohanim duchen quietly by his side, the minig becomes one kohen duchens, and the rest of the kohanim stand there like props. They don't open their mouth, b'chlal. They stand there and they listen, and together it's a bracha from this group of kohanim, but there's one kohen who duchens. Everyone else is just listening along. Now that is a much more controversial type of thing, because there, l'chayra, every kohen has a mitzvah to duchen. There's a mitzvah to say for a kohen to duchen. It's a mitzvah for him to do it at least once a day, maybe not more than once a day. That's the din of Shulchan Aruch, but at least once a day it's a mitzvah for him to duchen. As is gebracht mechaber and simkuf chavchas sef aleph. And l'chayra over here, all these kohanim are neglecting their ability to duchen. So if you tell me just being quiet, okay, that's a violation maybe of kol ram. It's a violation of ne'ima. Okay, but you could justify that's the better way to do it aloud, is do it with one chazan. But now if everyone's just standing there like a prop and only one kohen is duchening, what's going on over here? Now this minig, Taka rose a lot of eyebrows. Raised the eyebrows. Rabbi Tzal HaKohen of Vilna, who was one of the Rabbanim in Vilna. Vilna didn't really have Rabbanim after the Goyim, but he was one of the Rabbanim in Vilna. A Matz of Vilna. He was a Kohen. He one time ended up in Trieste, which is an Italian province, and he was there for shul. And imagine his surprise when he goes to wash his hands for duchening, and the Gabbai comes over to him and says, "You're a visiting Rav, Rabbi Tzal HaKohen. Why don't you duchen for us?" He's like, "I should duchen for you. Every kohen duchens for you. Sure, I'm going to duchen also like everybody else." He goes up there and he stands there with 20 kohanim, and imagine his surprise when the chazan says Yivarecha and he responds back Yivarecha, and it's pin drop silence. He's the only one talking. And Itaka was surprised. And in the tshuva that he writes in his Sefer Shut Reishis Bikurim Siman Daled, in the end of the tshuva he writes, it's like in italics. It's not really part of the tshuva. It's like I came across this very interesting minig. He says when I was in Italy in Trieste, where they asked me to duchen. I was the only one who did duchening. And halay davarhu. Now he, being the Talmud Chacham that he was, wants to justify this minig, and he brings a few interesting points. He says as follows. He says I have a raya from a pasuk and I have a raya from a Gemara. That's what he says. He says there's a pasuk that says as follows. The pasuk says. It's in Vayikra. It says Vayisa Aaron es yadav el am vayivarchem. Aaron lifted up his hands and he benched Klal Yisrael. Now the Ramban Afanord asks a question. The Ramban says Aaron had children. We know Aaron had children. Aaron had several children. Aaron probably had grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and they had the din of Kohanim. So why did you say Vayisa Aaron? Why didn't everybody get up and duchen? It's the Ramban's kasha. To which the Ramban gives a teretz, and the Ramban says that you have to say nidchak leimer sheyesh leimer shekan nitztava Aaron nesiyas kapayim liyom zeh. At this point, only Aaron was nitztav in Nesiyas Kapayim for that day during Hakamas HaMishkan, and only later on did Aaron's children get included in the midst of Nesiyas Kapayim and also become mechoyev in it. But on that day that Aaron was V'yisas Kapav, he was the only one who was mechoyev. So says the Reishis Bikurim, says Rabbi Tzal HaKohen, you don't have to say the Ramban's deichik. It's very simple. Mistama, in the times of the Mishkan, they had the minyan they had the minig like they did in Italy. Only one kohen was duchening, and if it's going to be Aaron and his children, Avada, Aaron, the Reish Mishpacha, the kohen, Agadol Me'achav, Aaron HaKohen, the Moshe Rabbeinu's brother, the original, of course Aaron's going to do the duchening, and everyone else is going to sit silently. So that you have to, Bezeh, it's salty from the Ramban's deichik, and you could just say that they did like the Italian minig. That's what he says, raya number one. Raya number two, he says, there's a very strange Gemara in Megillah. It's a Mishnah, I'm sorry. It's a strange Mishnah in Megillah. The Mishnah in Megillah in Daf Chavdal and Beis says Hamafter B'Navi, which was a subpar job. Vice says then also they don't like to get good aliyahs. Hamafter B'Navi, which Rashi explains, the person who got the Shvach aliyah, meaning he didn't get one of the aliyahs, he got to do Haftarah. It wasn't so by Kavadik. Hamafter B'Navi, in order to make it up for him or to give him a little extra kavod, who Peiris al Shema, who Over Lefnei Ateva, who Noises Kapav. He gets to do these other positions of honor. Now, it's okay if you tell me who says Shema, he leads them in Kriya Shema, whoever lefnei Atevi davens for the Amud, das verstehe. But who says Kapav, he duchens Manavshach. If he's a Kohen, he duchens anyhow, like every other Kohen. If he's not a Kohen, he doesn't duchen. So what does it mean who says Kapav? It's a very strange Mishnah. And the Mefarshei Mishnah, Tesis Yamtif and Rav David Pardo and others, each need to come up with a deichik to explain what exactly the Mishnah means over here, because it's taka, it's a strange Mishnah. Kipshute, it's a strange Mishnah. Says Rabbi Tzal HaKohen, and he's not the first one to think of it, but l'chayra he didn't know that the Italian Rabbanim, in 1700 already said this. Says Rabbi Tzal HaKohen, l'chayra the raya, it's a raya from this Mishnah like the Italian minig. who Noisias Kappa? One individual Kayin is going to be the Kayin leading the Noisias Kapayim. So who should be the guy to get it? So normally we give it to the Chashiva guy, the guy who has a good voice. But today we give it to the guy who did the Haftarah because he deserves he deserves a little prize for learning the Haftarah also. So if he's a Kayin, who Noisias Kappa if he gets that also? So says Rabbi Tzal Kayin, I have rayas from a pasuk and I have rayas from a Mishnah that the minig in Italy to do it this way is okay. This works. Okay, so this is Rabbi Tzal Kayin. He's the first Rav from Lita to come across this minig and bring it down. He says like that. Lamaisa, the Beis Halevi in the Hisafas on Chumash did not like this minig at all. The Beis Halevi it says as follows. So let's just to set the table for a second. Everybody's bakant is a thing called Shemei Kaina, right? Meaning one Jew is allowed to be mitzvah, another Jew with a chiyuv, a mitzvah that he has, with Shemei Kaina. It's a Gemara in Sukkah. The Gemara in Sukkah Lamed Ches says Minayin. The Gemara brings two Makairis. The Gemara in Brachas references it. The Gemara in Rosh Hashanah references it. It's all over that there's a din of Shemei Kaina. Now, Lemaisa, it's gepaskint very straightforward in Shulchan Aruch, and this is really a machlekes Rishonim. There's machlekes Rashi and the Balei Taisvis that we're basically as follows: someone who's in the middle of Shlish Shemad Esrei, and the tzibur already is up to kedusha, right? This is a shayla that happens all the time. This is the most common occurrence of Shemei Kain. Someone's in the middle of Shlish Shemad Esrei, the tzibur gets up to kedusha. So there's a machlekes Rashi and the Balei Taisis. Rashi says that he should be quiet and listen to the chazan. You be yaitz with Shemei Kain. You're good to go. You just pause for a second, you listen to the chazan's kedusha, yaitz with Shemei Kain. Rabbeinu Tam says no. Rabbeinu Tam says if Shemei Kain is real, and it is real. So Shemei Kaina says this, that you're talking. Shemei Kaina, it's as if you're talking. That's a hefsek in Milish Shemei Esrei. You can't stop and listen to the chazan. You keep davening. Rabbeinu Tam. But Rabbeinu Tam says, Afal Pi that I say this, Haminik Rashi. Rabbeinu Tam is already saying that in his days, he's aware that the minig is like Rashi, even though the Rabbeinu Tam holds it shver. Now in the Torah, in Simon Kuf Daled and Archaim, the Torah brings down both Shitas, the Beis Yosef handles it, the Bach handles it, and the Mechaber and Shulchan Aruch Paskins. You don't stop in middle Shemon Esrei, you're not for Kaddish or Kedusha. This is a din before in Shulchan Aruch that Shemei Kaina works. You stop, you pause, you listen Shemei Kaina. Afanart Mishnah Berurah brings, even though it's a machlekes about Rabbeinu Tam and Taisvis, halachas like Rashi that Shemei Kaina, it's not considered a hefsek, it's just considered ki oina, not oina mamish. Now this is a bakanta din. This is something everybody knows. Shemei Kaina. Comes along the Beis Halevi. The Beis Halevi says as follows. He says, Masha Amar Chacham Echad Birchas Kohanim. The Kohen Echad Yachal Lema Birchas Kohanim V'Sharei Kohanim Yishmu V'Shemei Kohanim. This that one Chacham said, that one Kohen could say it, and everybody else would just listen along and be Yetzer Shemei Kohanim. He says it's a problem. Amram Ikar Adin LeNehira Klal. The Shemei Kohanim is Shayach Rak B'Davar De'Ein Tzarich Be'Ela Amira L'Chuda. Shemei Kohanim is only Shayach by something where you only need an Amira. Aval Birchas Kohanim the Tzarich Kol Ram Ka'Adam Ha'Omer L'Chaveri. Birchas Kohanim that needs particulars related to song. It needs a kol ram, and like we discovered, it needs a lot more related to song. It needs particulars. He says because when one kohen saying it, you could tell me I'm yotze with shmiya or whatever, but to be yotze, to have a kol ram that he's legging, I can't get his kol ram. Kol ram is like a physical characteristic that this kohen does. He's doing a b'ne'imo or b'kol ram. I can't attach myself to his kol ram. So says the Beis Halevi, I saw b'shem, chacham echad that this works by duchening. This can't be. This doesn't work with the rules of Shemei Kain. Now, Grada, Pinchas Halevi Epstein of the Eidach Haredis, the guy of the Eidach Haredis in his Sefer on site in Minchas Chareva, he brings down that he heard from Reb Zalman Sender Shapira Kavner Rav that the Beis Halevi later on found out that this was an actual minig that happened in Italy. It wasn't just some academic question. And the Beis Halevi said, if I would know that this is an alta minig in a Chashevik Hila in Klal Yisrael, I would be Mvatal Daiti. Meaning my lamda shakasha, I'd put it aside. I don't know, come up with the teretz. That's what the Pinchas Levi Epstein brings down. The Brisk though, in his Sefer on Chumash, Brisk defends the Beis Halevi from the Chazon Ish's kashas that we'll see in a second. So the Brisk obviously didn't hold it. Beis Halevi would have been chayzer, and he defends the Beis Halevi's position from the ensuing kashas. Now, Lamaisa, the Chazon Ish in Arachayim has a whole maracha to discuss this Indian of Shemei Kain and the Beis Halevi with Chakiris and Chakiris. Now, if you're bakant in Chazon Ish does not do Chakiris and Yeshiva Shekler. The Chazon Ish does not do this. He's almost like Lahed Yanat. He wrote on Rav Chaim, and he's always, knocking down a Chakira here, a Chakira there. So, rather, this is so out of character in the Chazon Ish that Rav Shlomo Yosef Zevin, in his Sefer Ishim Veshitas, his monograph on the Chazon Ish, when he handles the Chazon Ish's Derech HaLimud, he says that it's possible to say the Chazon Ish's Derech HaLimud had some sort of progression, and when he was a mamish, a frisher young man in Vilna, he liked to learn a little more yeshivish, and later on he changed to the Derech of the Chazon Ish. And his example that he gives is, he says the Chazon Ish in Archaim, in the first volume that he ever put out, Mamash Azir Geman, he has this whole Chakira where he goes after the Beis Halevi and a whole Lamda Shapis, and This is not really his derech. Later on, in the other 22 volumes of the Chazon Ish is published in like Kontresim, the other 22 volumes of the Chazon Ish that span from Brachas to Roktzin, Kol Tarakula, there his derech changed, and it must be that it was like Kimin Yaldus, Nizr Kaboy, when he was writing this piece. This is Rabbi Zevin, he's a expert analyzer of derech halimut, so whatever. I'm just, for what it's worth, Rabbi Zevin uses this as an example. Now the Beis Halevi in his Hom HaRachav here, and I see we're running out of time, but the Beis Halevi, the Chazon Ish, he brings a few rayas that Shemei Kaina is like a symbiotic relationship. It's like your Amira and my Shmira together could be Yotzei mitzvah, is good enough for mitzvah. He brings some rayas, you need arvos, you need other dinim, and then he summarizes, he continues in, he says, Kivan she'enu Shemei Kaina, who hisachtus hashemei v'hamashmiya, zeh b'dibur v'zeh b'shmiya. Since Shemei Kaina is putting together one guy's dibur and one guy's shmiya, and that's what does it together, until when this is done successfully, the dibur of the medaber is misyachas to the shemeya. Even by mitzvahs that are not just simple dibur, they need some sort of extra thing. Even something that needs kol ram, or needs mitach aksav, or it needs some other din, or it needs neshima achas, or it needs some other din, you could be yaitze with your friend. And Mamela, he says, yesh la'ayim b'sefer Beis Halevi lahagridzal, a guy even Brisk, where he says something that doesn't stem with what I'm saying, and he's chaylik on him. The Chazon Ish is chaylik on him. Now, it's interesting that the Rogachover, who doesn't quote either of these, I'm sure didn't know, Zichar didn't know the Chazon Ish, and likely didn't know the Beis Halevi either. The Rogachover says that the reason why we say Aseres B'nei Haman ourselves, every person says it themselves by Kriyas Megillah, is because it needs to be B'neshima Achas. You can't be Yotzei B'Shemei Kaina. The rest of the Megillah being Yotzei B'Shemei Kaina. The Chazan reads it, you're listening, you're Yotzei. But Hayos, this needs Neshima Achas. Neshima Achas is, again, it's like a physical characteristic. It's like Kol Ram. You can't be Yotzei, that's why we read it out loud. Now, it's a very shver, Rogachover and the Achronim asking it, that first of all, saying Aseres B'nei Haman Neshima Achas is not L'Kuli Alma. It's a Machlekes. Beis, there are other psukim that we say, everyone says out loud. And we don't say those, it's a tumult, whatever, Ayin Sham. But the Rogachover says it also. Now, I'm out of time. Just, to me, this is interesting to highlight, Bakanta, Yeshiva Shemachlekes, the Chazon Ish and the Beis Halevi, about really an academic yeshivish question about Shemei Kaina, and show where it's really sourced in a very real life Machlekes in Italy, a few hundred years before it. If someone's interested, the Minchas Asher in Parshas Bahaloischa has 36 nafkaminas between the Beis Halevi and the Chazon Ish. The Yesh Malafakvik, some are good, some are not as good. He himself, is writing that I'm putting this out so you could have fun with this. 36 potential nafkaminas between the Machlekes, the Beis Halevi, and the Chazon Ish. Ayin Sham if you're interested.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.